South Africa brought this ridiculous case to try to get Israel to stop its campaign against Hamas in the wake of the October 7th massacre. It wanted the ICJ to rule that Israel has no right to defend its people and fight to bring back the hostages. And we're very pleased that the ICJ saw right to throw that out and reaffirm that Israel has a right to defend itself.
There's always quite a lot of waffle in these rulings before you kind of get to the nitty-gritty of what's being said. How are you interpreting exactly what was said?
We're still reading and studying the decision. It runs 30 pages and there are separate opinions as well to consider. But it appears that the ICJ has simply called on Israel to implement policies that it's already doing. It called for more humanitarian aid to go into Gaza, and we've placed no restrictions on humanitarian aid. In fact, we've doubled the amount that our crossings can handle. They called for Israel to do everything possible to avoid harm to civilians, and that's what we've been doing since October 7th. And we've been clear in word and in deed that we are fighting Hamas, the terrorists who perpetrated October 7th, and doing everything we can to avoid harm to civilians. It's sad and tragic that Hamas is pursuing a human shield strategy of trying to hide behind and under civilians and their infrastructure. And we think anyone who's seriously concerned about civilian casualties, as we are, should demand that Hamas surrender and very clearly point the finger at Hamas as the reason for the suffering. And by the way, the court said right in the preamble of that decision, this conflict is happening because Hamas began an attack on October 7th with those unspeakable atrocities and abduction of the hostages who are still trapped in its terror dungeons.
With reference to that preamble, is that something that gave Israel some encouragement? Because there has been an accusation that there's been a lack of recognition of October the 7th and a lack of compassion for the victims of October the 7th when anybody debates Israel's response. So in some way, the mention of that it is arguably better than maybe Israel might have hoped.
Of course, it's important to understand that this war is happening because Hamas declared war, and it's fighting war from inside densely populated areas, trying to use people as human shields. That is why this war is taking place, and that's why we're fighting to dismantle Hamas and bring back the hostages. Now, South Africa wanted the court to tell the parents sitting at the back of that courtroom that they have no right to fight to bring their children back from the terrorists who we fear are torturing and starving and executing and raping them in its terror tunnels. And so it's essential to remember that Israel has a right to self-defense, the same right to defend itself as every country. And that is why this conflict exists. And we will continue fighting to bring down Hamas and bring back the hostages.
How fair would it be to say that there has been some unhelpful comments from some in the Knesset and also more recently from groups who have talked about resettling in Gaza and that kind of language?
What matters is the policies of the government of Israel. And the policies of the government of Israel are to destroy Hamas while doing everything possible to minimize harm to civilians and to bring back the hostages. The Prime Minister has been very clear. We have no intention of displacing the population from Gaza, certainly not permanently reoccupying Gaza, and that we are fighting against Hamas, not the people of the Gaza Strip. And that's why we have put in place measures that no other army in the history of the world has used to try to protect civilians. And ultimately, that is what matters, the policies of the government of Israel and the actions of the brave Israel Defense Forces.
And right now, what is your view of how that military operation is going? Because we have seen a considerable loss of life on the part of IDF soldiers of late.
Yeah, it's very difficult in Israel just the other day to wake up to news of 24 soldiers killed in 24 hours. We are paying a very heavy price. And we will never forgive Hamas for declaring this war with the atrocities of October 7th and forcing us to defend our people. Now, look, clearly on the hostage question, it's a source of immense frustration in Israel that we haven't been able to get all the hostages back. But in terms of destroying Hamas, we've far exceeded expectations. We have completely dismantled Hamas's military infrastructure in northern Gaza. The terror tunnel network there, the command centers, no longer exist. In central Gaza, we've destroyed its weapon production capability. We've killed at least 9,000 Hamas terrorists, wounded thousands more, apprehended thousands more. I've seen one analysis that suggests that we've knocked possibly up to 60% of Hamas's fighters out of action. So Israel's campaign to put military pressure on Hamas and make the Hamas terror state crumble is working, and we're going to continue until Hamas is removed from power and can no longer repeat those atrocities as it has spent day and night threatening to do again and again.